Hello, this is the video for Great Depression number 2. We're going to be looking at the crash and some of the early effects of people during the Great Depression. Here's our essential question. What were the effects of the Great Depression and how did the country react? Remember, if I ever go too fast for a video, you can always pause so you can write down the essential question or take a second to think about the things I've been talking about. So a little bit of background before we get to the Great Depression. Remember last time we talked about some of the long-term causes of the Great Depression. Make sure you go back and you remember those. Those are going to be key. Those are kind of the long-term causes. The first part of this video, we're going to look at the immediate spark that leads to the Great Depression. And before we talk about the spark, we need to talk about this man. This is the President of the United States. He's the Republican Herbert Hoover. And Herbert Hoover agrees with a lot of the government policies that are currently trying to help businesses grow. He wants there to be little regulation. He wants to have businesses pay low taxes. And while that's going to be helpful for many businesses to grow, there's going to be some major issues that are going to make our economy fragile in the 1920s and easily able to be broken. Okay, look at that, even a young Hoover supporter. So throughout the 1920s, Americans began investing in the stock market. You've probably heard the stock market before, but just a quick tutorial of what a stock is. A stock means that you own a part of a company. So let's take the company Apple, okay? The company who makes your cell phones and computers and all that. Let's say this big box here, this big square rectangle is the company Apple. If you wanted to, you could go and buy a piece of that company. And so you're like a very, very, very small owner of Apple. Okay, if I wanted to buy a stock, I could buy this little tiny red dot and be a little tiny owner of Apple. Okay, if I wanted to buy a stock right now, I can click on this. I made a link there. And right now, the price, as I'm looking at this, the price of an Apple stock is $142. If I wanted to buy one tiny piece of Apple, I could pay $143 and I'd be a little tiny part owner. Now, why would you buy a piece of Apple? Because in the future, if I wanted to, I could sell that tiny piece of Apple and hopefully the price has gone up. So that means I've made money. So if I bought it right now for $143 and then tomorrow sold it for $150, then I just made $7. Okay, why do people do this? Well, to make a lot of money. Many people do this to pay for their retirement for when they're older. There's a lot of different ways to do this. And you'll talk more about this when you take economics next year. But many Americans are beginning to buy stocks and beginning to make money in the stock market. Now, one way to tell how good the stock market is doing is through a number called the Dow Jones. The Dow Jones basically just takes the top 30 most powerful, biggest companies and lumps them all together and creates a number. It's basically an average. And that average tells us how good the stock market is doing. If that number goes up, that means people are buying a lot of stocks and the prices are going up. Americans want the stocks to go up in price because that means they're making money, right? You buy a stock at a low price, you want it to go up. So then when you sell it, you make money. So that Dow Jones number is supposed to tell us how the stock market is doing. And here's a graph that shows us how the Dow Jones was doing in the 1920s. We can see the beginning part, there's a little bit of dip. It stays pretty normal for the first 4 or 5 years. But then the last part of the 1920s, it begins to skyrocket. The price is increasing dramatically. in the last part of the 1920s. And as that's going up, people are making a lot of money. So let's take an example. Let's say I'm going to buy a stock in 1920, okay, this little yellow dot. And I decide to hold on to that piece of stock for a long time, for 8-9 years. If I would sell my stock right here, the top of this yellow line, I would make a lot of money. But what was ended up happening is throughout the 1920s, people started telling their friends, hey, you should buy a stock too. And so people started buying stocks late, like in 1928, like this red dot guy. Let's say he's my friend Bill. So Bill goes and buys a stock, and we'll see what happens to him. People started buying more and more stocks. And if I go back to that last slide, you'll see Bill just bought a stock at kind of a high price. It might be a little too high, but he keeps hearing how people are making money, so he buys a stock at a high price. But it might be a little bit too high, and he doesn't maybe have the money right now. So many Americans did what Bill did, and they bought on margin. Buying on margin basically means that you pay a small part of a stock's price and you borrow the rest. Let's say the stock cost $100. If you bought on margin, you may only use $10 of your own money and borrow $90 to pay for the stock. So at some point, you need to pay it off. So what Bill would need is for that price of the stock to keep going up and up and up. So when he sells it, he can pay back his debt. Now, it can be a good thing. You can make money on buying on margin if the stock market keeps going up. If it goes down and you need to sell, not only are you going to lose money, but you're also going to be in debt. Well, with the prices continuing to increase in the 1920s, eventually investors realized that their stock really wasn't worth as much as they thought it was. It was kind of like a bubble that was growing and growing and growing. And unlike a basketball, which is a hard ball and you can bounce and everything, a bubble, even if it's really big, is fragile. And if it's popped, it's gone. That's what happens in the 1920s. That bubble is growing bigger and bigger and bigger until finally people realize, whoa, this is not stable. It pops and it's gone. People start to sell their stocks quickly. And when that happens, then more people start selling their stock and the prices go down. And the prices going down means people are going to lose money, especially if they bought on margin and they owe money to somebody else. So when that price goes down, 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 that's called a stock market crash. Now, the crash is not the immediate cause of this Great Depression that we're going to be talking about. It's like the spark. This is what launches the Great Depression and people losing their jobs, businesses going bankrupt, that we'll see in just a minute. All those people, like my friend Bill, who bought stock on margin, are now stuck with huge debts. So we can see here, this is what we saw before in 1928. That line is now going down. So if I decide to sell, I could sell it and I could make a lot of money still. I bought low and sold high. But Bill, maybe he couldn't. He bought high and he had to sell low. Here you can see people going in New York City to where the stocks are bought and sold, seeing if they can get any of their money back. But it's all disappearing. It's all gone. Billions of dollars suddenly vanish. Here you can see this is what that Dow Jones number looks like. It's going up and up and up in the 1920s and then crashes down. So this is just a graph showing from 1920 to about 1932. What I'm going to do next is show you what this number looks like from 1920 all the way to today. This is what it looks like. And you can see this little tiny blip right here, the bottom left hand, that's the Great Depression. So it seems kind of quaint when you look at how high the stock market is now. It's much higher. Could there be another depression or in the future? Who knows? Are the stocks really worth this much? I don't know enough about investments to make that judgment. So this crash is like a spark for the Great Depression. And suddenly something called demand decreases because people lost their money. Demand is the people's ability and desire to pay for stuff. And people might want to buy stuff, but if you lost all your money because the stock market crashed, you're not able to pay for stuff. Demand is what helps our economy grow. When people buy stuff, our economy gets better. When you go and buy a Big Mac or buy a candy bar, you're actually helping our economy to grow. And when people can't spend money all at the same time, that's what hurts our economy. That's what puts us into a recession or a Great Depression, a huge money financial disaster. And so many Americans are scared. They're scared they're going to lose all their money because they lost so much in the stock market crash. So many Americans, knowing that they still have bills to pay, quickly go to the bank to take all their money out to pay their fees, pay their rent, pay for their groceries. The problem is everybody started taking the money out of their banks. Now, banks are not a place where they just take your money, put it into a big money bag with the money symbol on it, and put it in the back vault. Banks take your money and they use it. They use it to give somebody a loan to buy a car. They use your money to give to somebody else to pay for a house. And they use that money because they know not everyone comes and takes all their money out at the same time. The problem is, in a bank run where people do try to take their money out at the same time, it's very difficult for the bank to give that money out, right? If I'm a bank and I got your money and then I go and give it to somebody else to pay for their house, and all of a sudden everyone's coming in and wanting their money back, I need to go to that person with the house and say, hey, I need you to pay your debt right now. Now, if a house costs $100,000, that person's not going to be able to just cough up $100,000 right now. And so if I'm the bank and I can't give money out to people when they're trying to withdraw their money, then my bank is going to close down. And that's what happened. People in the first row of this picture here, they might get their money back. But if you were late, if you're in the back of the line and you're trying to get your money back, by that time you get to the front desk, the bank might run out of money. The bank might have given it all away. And in that case, you lose the money in your bank account, it's gone forever. You're never getting it back. And tens of thousands of people lost money and lost everything, all their life savings. Over 11,000 banks, almost half of all the banks in the United States, went out of business. They lost everything. So banks are going out of business. Businesses start to go bankrupt. Over 90,000 businesses shut down. And with all those businesses shutting down, that means all those workers lose their jobs. Unemployment goes from 3%, which is really low, to 25%. A quarter of Americans who wanted to find a job couldn't find one. And remember, the way our economy grows is when people spend money. So if people are unemployed and don't have a job, they can't spend money. So millions of people become homeless, struggle with hunger, don't have the bare necessities that they've lived with their whole life. Some would go to local parks and would put together scrap material like plywood and pieces of metal and create this little, a shack. And eventually in some bigger cities, there'd be so many people building these little homes out of scrap metal and pieces of plywood that they called them little towns. They called them little Hoovervilles, which named after the president, President Hoover, kind of mocking him and blaming him for what's going on. Here you can see a picture of a Hooverville. Hundreds of people living in these little shacks because they can't afford to pay for a home, pay for an apartment. Thousands of people have to go to soup kitchens and bread lines to get free food because they can't pay for it. And things are even worse for people of color, for African Americans, for Mexican Americans, for other groups of Americans. Great Depression is even worse. Oftentimes, these people are paid the least amount of money. Their wages are lowest. Oftentimes, they're the first people to be fired from a job. And oftentimes, they're the last people to be hired for a new job. And so in some cases, unemployment rises into the 30–40% for certain groups of Americans. There's more violence against African Americans throughout the country, but especially in the South. And for Mexican Americans, they face deportation from the government. Almost 2 million Mexican Americans were deported. And it's not just illegal citizens or illegal aliens. 60% of the people who were deported were American citizens. So things are going really poorly for everyone in the United States. It is a rough time. And it's going to be difficult to get America out. That's it for this video. If you have any questions, please send me an email. Let me know if you have anything that you need from me. Thank you.